My name is Fran Cole, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Western Nevada County. What you will be watching is one of a series of educational presentations that we are providing to our community. The League is a nonpartisan organization and does not advocate or endorse any particular political party or candidate. The speakers that you will see are expressing their own views and not those of the League. Today's topic is the history of diversity in Nevada County. Diversity, equality, and equal opportunity is a theme of the League of Women Voters this year. Today, I have found that if you look at where we have been historically, it is a good indication of how we got where we are today. Today, we have with us Bernie Zimmerman, who is the chair of the Nevada County Historical Landmarks Commission, which was created by the county in 1969 to preserve and promote local history. Bernie is the author of Exploring Nevada County, a guide to the over 200 historical landmarks in the county. He is also the author of Ghost Towns of Nevada County. He is a lifetime member of the Historical Society and contributed articles about local history to the Bulletin. And recently, he received the Citizen of the Year Award in recognition of his contributions to raising public awareness of local history. He has also posted articles about Nevada County history on Wikipedia, in local newspapers, and on the Landmark Commission website. So I would like to talk to Bernie today about 3 historical sites that have been overlooked in local history. Bernie, would you like to discuss them?
Sure. Well, I guess we can start with why they were overlooked and why are they now being looked at. About 3 years ago, I was rereading the Nevada County Chronicles, which are Dave Comstock's history of Nevada County during the Gold Rush days. And it struck me how the communities that he was describing in his book differed from the historical landmark sites that we have in Nevada County. So we discussed it at the commission level and wound up appointing a task force, sort of the diversity, racial and ethnic diversity task force. And we've then started the process of trying to expand the reach of our landmark sites. And in recent years, we've gotten a number of them through the Board of Supervisors. I think today we're going to talk about the black community, the Kentucky Ridge Mine, which operated by slaves for a while, the Grass Valley AME Methodist Episcopalian Church and School Site, and the Alexander Family Home Site.
So Bernie, for purposes of future presentations, what other local communities have been overlooked historically?
Well, we start with the Nisenan, of course. They were here before all the rest of these folks. The issue with the Nisenan is they're very reluctant to expose their sacred and traditional sites. They're concerned about vandalism, they're concerned about desecration, and so on. But we are working with them. Neil Locke, a commissioner, is working with the Nisenan tribe, and we've got a couple of things that we hope to do in the next year or so. Now, in addition to that, we mentioned the black community, the Chinese community. When California became a state in 1852, the population of Nevada County was about 20% Chinese. Yet there's not an awful lot about the Chinese presence in our historical landmarks. There was a Jewish community, and we recently have landmarked Hirschman's Pond. There was a Hispanic community. Many of the miners that came from the East Coast didn't know how to mine, but the miners that came here from Chile and Mexico and Peru did. But of course, they were very quickly kind of excluded through these various exclusionary bills, foreign miners taxes, and so on. That's a community that we're having a lot of trouble with, identifying sites and so on, because contemporary news accounts and historical accounts don't name them other than to say, Mexican miners struck it rich, or something like that. Let's see, there was also a Hawaiian and Polynesian community, the Kanaka Creek, north of Nevada City. German Lutheran community, we've landmarked the St. Paul church and school site in Chicago Park. So as you can see, there were a lot of ethnic groups that really are underrepresented in Nevada County history.
That's great. Well, hopefully we'll be able to come back and talk about those at a future date. But you mentioned the Kentucky Ridge Mine site. Please tell us about that.
A lot of people are amazed when they hear that Nevada County had a mine, a gold mine, that was run by slave labor. The mine is located roughly at the intersection of Bitney Springs and Newtown Roads. Colonel English, who was a slaveholder from the South, bought about 40 slaves with him in 1851 when he acquired the mine. And it was run as a slave labor colony until he died in the summer of 1852. He fell off his horse and may have been drunk, but his weapon discharged and killed him.
Maybe you could explain something to me that I don't understand. California was a free state. How could there be miners who were enslaved?
Well, that is an interesting question. It would take a long time to answer. The bottom line, though, is very simple. The fact that California entered as a free state tells you more about Washington politics than California politics. California, at the time it became a state, had a very large population of Southerners and Southern sympathizers, and if it had been put to a straight vote, we probably would have come in as a slave state. But it was all part of the Compromise of 1850 when, if you remember, the United States got sovereignty over California after the Mexican-American War, which basically brought to the United States much of what is now Southwest United States, and they had to decide what to do with all that territory, and as a result of the compromise, it was decided that California would enter as a free state. Now, that said, that was basically largely ignored in California. In fact, after California passed its own fugitive slave law, and it was challenged in the California courts, the California Supreme Court ruled that the language in the California Constitution, that it was a free state, was not mandatory. It was what we call exhortatory. In other words, it was something to strive for, but you didn't really have to do it. And the bottom line was, it generally wasn't done.
Interesting. Were there families that came along with the miners, and did they live at the mine site?
They did live at the mine site, and we're thinking about getting a grant to do some archaeological exploration. There were families, we know of at least 5 or 6 families that came out of the mine and eventually resettled in Grass Valley.
So are there still descendants of those families that are here?
Not that we know of, and if anybody watching this knows of any, let me know. Just go to our website, NevadaCountyLandmarks.com, and you'll find contact information. I'd love to hear from you.
One more question about Kentucky Ridge. When Colonel English died in the horse accident, did that result in the miners being freed?
Yes. Now, exactly how that happened, we're not clear, but I think it's fair to say that within a year, all of the enslaved blacks had left the mine, moved into Grass Valley, and become respectable free citizens. Some of them may have bought their way out. We don't know about that, but I think basically they just left.
I'm very glad that the Landmarks Commission is recognizing these communities. And so let's move on to the second one, which is the African Methodist Episcopal Church site.
Okay. So they leave the Kentucky Ridge Mine, move into town, and one of the things they need is a place to worship. And the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, was the first black church to be established in the United States. Dates back to around the beginning of the 19th century. It was founded by free blacks in Philadelphia who worshiped at a Methodist church and became dissatisfied with the way they were treated, so they established their own church. Isaac Sanks, one of the, well, he was a former slave. He was not enslaved at the Kentucky Ridge Mine, but his wife and brother-in-law were. And he came back to California. They all got reunited in 1854. So we're now about 2 years or so after Colonel English dies. Isaac Sanks was instrumental in the founding of the AME Church in Grass Valley.
When I was looking through the history of this church, I noticed that there was a mention of the Clinch family. And the Clinch family is a very well-known historical family in Grass Valley. What is that connection?
Well, the church operated for about 20 or 30 years until the black community sort of started to dwindle, at which point the church and school site were sold to Charles Clinch, who, as you said, was a prominent merchant, later mayor of Grass Valley. He cleared the site, subdivided into 4 parcels. The 4 homes that you see on the site now were built in the 1890s.
You just mentioned the school. Did the black children and the white children go to school together?
They did for a few years. Oh. And then by the mid-1850s, California enacted segregation laws. So eventually, initially, the state was supposed to have segregated schools. I don't think that ever really happened. So the black community, again, Isaac Sanks, the leader, he and Chasey, his wife, had children by then, built a school next to the church. In 1880, California changed its mind and eliminated the need for segregated schools. And so eventually the school kind of withered away. And as I said earlier, the property was sold to Charles Clinch in the 1890s.
So there are a number of historical church and church sites in Nevada County. Why is this church particularly significant to the commission?
Well, it was very important to the black community. It was more than just a church. It was a cultural center. It was a social center. They had concerts. They had musical events. They raised funds for all sorts of causes that were important to them. Civil rights causes, trying to get old legislation repealed, new legislation enacted. They had freedom festivals at the church. Those would be commemorating something like the Emancipation Proclamation or the enactment of the Civil Rights Amendments, the 15th Amendment giving them the right to vote, that sort of thing. It reminds me, one of the interesting things about Isaac Sanks is after the 15th Amendment and the right to vote came into being, he ran for office and is believed to be the first black person to run for public office in California. He ran for what was then called trustee of Grass Valley. It's kind of the same as a council member today. Didn't get a lot of votes, but he did run.
So Bernie, here's a hard one for you. So this is very notable, what he did, the first black person to run for office, a lot of historical milestones. Why isn't this information been promoted previously?
I really can't answer that. I think part of it has to do with the fact that the black community in Nevada County dwindled and to some degree disappears around the turn of the last century. His son, Isaac's son, Isaac T. Sanks, actually was nominated by the Republican Party. We believe to be the first black person to be nominated by a major party. He ran for town constable in 1891. But I think it's one of these situations where unless there's a demand, somebody says, let's landmark this site, it doesn't happen. We've just decided in recent years that we're going to remedy that by doing more outreach, more research on our own, and we're actually looking for things. And when you look, they're not that difficult to find, except in the case of the Mexican and Chilean community. And if anybody knows of any sites important to them, again, let me know. Great.
Well, another historical mystery to be uncovered. So let's talk about the last site that you mentioned, which was the home site for Preston and Louisa Alexander. Why was that significant? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the Alexanders were one of the pioneer families in Nevada County, and especially in Nevada City. Its significance, well, I'll put it this way. A lot of people want, Preston Alexander, basically, he did some mining, he did some odd jobs. His most prominent thing was he was the bill poster, almost like the town crier for Nevada City. He would, put up bills for all kinds of events around town. So people say, well, why is he being honored? Well, think about the reality of Nevada County in those days. He wasn't going to be elected senator. He wasn't going to be elected judge. He wasn't going to own the largest mine, etc. But it's clear from all contemporary accounts that he was a well thought of person. People respected him. And they named Alexander Street after him. It's the first street to be named after a black person. So we thought that was worthy of commemorating.
Great. Okay. So was there also a connection between the African Methodist Episcopal Church and the Alexanders?
Preston Alexander belonged to both the Grass Valley and the Nevada City Church. He was an officer in the Nevada City Church. We haven't landmarked that site yet because the property was recently sold, and we're actually trying to work with the new owners, bring him up to speed, and so on. But he was very active with the church, and again, a lot of what I said about Mr. Sanks in Grass Valley holds true for Preston Alexander in terms of what was done at the AME Church. The Nevada City Church, unfortunately, slid into Oregon Ravine. It was located on Upper Pine Street, I think 549 or some number like that. And during a storm, it slid down into the ravine, and that was basically the end of the church. So I think it survived for about 20 years.
So what happened to the Alexander family? Are there descendants? Are there Alexanders still in our community?
Not so far as we know. They had a large family, he and Louisa, and I think 4 or 5 of them survived, into adulthood. They continued to live in that property into the early part of the 20th century and sold it to another black person, Mr. Coleman. And then, our knowledge of the Alexander descendants sort of starts to peter out. We know some of them moved to Oakland and into the Bay Area, and I think one of them may have moved to Sacramento, and then we kind of lose track of them.
That's great. So you've told us about these 3 sites. Are there other sites important to the black community that the Landmarks Commission is going to recognize?
Well, as I mentioned, we are working on the Nevada City AME Church. We hope to get that behind us in the next, foreseeable future. There are another couple that we're very interested in are the Carters. Dennis Carter was a very prominent musician in Nevada, in Grass Valley and Nevada City. In the 70s and 80s, he frequently led things like the 4th of July parade and things like that. He taught music. Black and white people studied with him. His wife, Jenny, was another very interesting person. She served as the local correspondent for The Elevator, which is one of the black newspapers out of San Francisco. Wrote an awful lot about the black community and life in Nevada City and Nevada County and so on. We're still trying to do some research, try to figure out exactly where they lived, what site can we landmark, but we're working on that.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Bernie. I so much appreciate that the Landmarks Commission has a focus on recognizing these communities that previously have been unrecognized. And I thank you very much for participating today.
My pleasure.